My number 7 best chess game of the 1960s is Veresov versus Bronstein from the Soviet Team Championship of 1960. Now, when I was coming up as a very hungry young chess player, you didn't have chess.com, you didn't have leechess.org, you didn't have chess24. What I did have was the local library and Barnes & Noble, which is where I purchased my first chess books. They didn't have a lot of books, but they did have Sorcerer's Apprentice by David Bronstein, a book that I deeply loved and still love to this day. A lot of chess players know Bronstein's Zurich 1953 tournament book, one of the greatest tournament books of all time, but he wrote just as passionately and more personally about his own games. This game right here, though relatively short and relatively simple, deeply impressed me with the clarity and beauty of the strategic and tactical ideas. If you know of Veresov, then you probably know that he liked to begin with d4 and 2 knight c3. But in this game, after Bronstein responds with e6, he does follow up with c4. Now, after c4, we get bishop to b4 check, bishop d2, pawn to a5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, pawn d6, queen c2, knight c6, g3, e5, a trade on e5, and in this position, Veresov picks the most aggressive option. He castles queenside. However, Bronstein notes, white should play 9a3 here, and depending on black's response, then decide on which side to castle. Well, Veresov was a very direct player, the kind of player who plays 9 castles queenside and doesn't wait to see what his opponent is going to do before deciding where to place his king. After he castles on the queen side, Bronstein plays bishop takes c3, and bishop takes c3 looks pretty good for Veresov at first glance. After all, isn't this bishop pretty nicely placed? It's hitting e5, and the rook is now attacking the black queen, and it is the only rook on the open file, or near to the open file. However, the engine says that Bronstein is already significantly better, and Bronstein plays practically perfectly from here to prove that point. I think for a human, for me, it's not clear right away just how problematic the white king position is. But it soon will be, thanks to Bronstein's incisive play. He plays queen e7, and Veresov plays the natural bishop to g2. Now, knight b4 is one of the first incisive moves that Bronstein plays. Of course, he's hitting the queen, and you don't want to take on b4 and open up the a file for the black rook, so queen a4 check seems to make sense. However, it is met by the responsible bishop to d7, developing a piece and hitting the white queen. The queen falls back to a3, and now bishop to c6, about which Bronstein says, this position was judged by Veresov as better for white, as black now loses a pawn. From my side, it looks better for black as he has targets to attack in the white position, some weak squares near the white king, and the pawn on e2. Very favorable for black is the fact that the white queen is completely out of play. Veresov goes ahead and wins the pawn. Bishop takes e5. Bronstein coolly castles. After he castles, he has threats like bishop takes f3 and queen takes e5. The softness of the pawn on e2 is also a big issue. As a result, really the only viable move for Veresov is bishop takes on f6. Certainly he's not happy to give up his good bishop, but he doesn't have much choice. Now, after queen takes f6 from Bronstein, we see rook to d2, and now a fine move, bishop to e4. Now, this has some obvious ideas, including simply controlling these light squares around the king. That has a lot of value. However, it also lays the groundwork for some really deep and clever tactical ideas. Bronstein says, the start of a very ingenious plan. I had seen this idea before in some chess compositions and was pleased to be able to put my knowledge into practice. Amazingly, Veresov is nearly lost already. He doesn't have any idea what's coming, and he simply plays rook h to d1. To be fair, he doesn't have much better. At this point, Bronstein plays a great idea to bring nearly unstoppable threats against the white king. Pause your video if you want to try to find this idea. Well, Bronstein comes up with h6. 2 exclamation points. But why? The answer is revealed after bishop h3, still no idea what's coming, and bishop h7. Again, 2 exclamation points for following through on this incredible idea. It's very direct, but very effective. Queen g6, and then simply queen to b1 and mate. The light squares around the white king are so vulnerable that there's really no response to this idea. At this point, Veresov plays rook to d7. Now, at first glance, this might look like an active move, but the idea is totally defensive in nature. Veresov just wants to free the d2 square so his king can try to run to the king side. If his king could make it to the king side, then it would be like it was castled there the whole time, and we would have a whole new game. Of course, that should not be possible, but you need to be precise to stop the idea. Now, in this position, if Bronstein follows through on his original idea with queen g6, then after king d2, he should be winning according to the engine, but there's no forced win, and it's starting to feel like the king is a little bit of a slippery eel that might slip away. Instead, Bronstein plays more precisely, rook f to e8. I like this move very much. He brings every piece into the attack. Now, after rook e8, there's pressure on the e-pawn. So the idea is still queen g6 with renewed vigor because there's now the idea of queen c2 mate, but also if the king tries to run to d2, then after queen c2, you will have a follow-up queen e2 mate because of the participation of the rook in the attack. As a result, at this point we see king d2. Veresov feels like I have to run for it now. I'm never going to get another opportunity. But he walks right into a refutation prepared by Bronstein. Because the queen is not yet on g6, the bishop, which has made this sneaky maneuver sliding back into h7, is now ready to spring back into action. Bishop f5, the winning move. Now, the bishop on h3 and the rook on d7 are hit. If bishop takes on f5, then after queen takes f5, there's the idea of queen takes d7, picking up the loose rook, and there is also the idea of queen c2, king back, and queen e2 checkmate, as we've been mentioning. As a result, this position is totally over. You cannot defend the rook and the c2 square. So Veresov, after bishop f5, actually tried the move queen to c3, but after bishop takes h3, he's just losing a piece, and after queen takes f6, pawn takes f6, he assessed the position and decided there was no point in continuing from here, so he did resign the game. I hope that you've enjoyed this game as much as I did. I really encourage you to check out Bronstein's Sorcerer's Apprentice and his book on Zurich 1953. His writing is some of the best in chess. If you want to see more of my favorite games from the 1960s, then simply click on that playlist that is popping up on your screen.